Ma'am? I wasn't supposed to be there. The seat I took wasn't mine. In fact, there wasn't even a name card for me. Just an empty chair at the farthest corner of the ballroom, half hidden behind a floral column. No one noticed when I arrived. No one looked up. Not even my mother. I didn't plan to stay long. Just enough to see her in that white dress, her smile smug and glowing, her words already sharpening for the toast. I knew how it would go. I'd seen it all before from the outside. But then he stood. Across the polished floor, in front of the mic, stood a man in his 60s, silver hair, proud spine, the father of the groom. His voice wasn't loud, but somehow the entire room quieted. "There's someone here," he said, eyes scanning. "Someone who once dragged my bloody, broken body off a battlefield. Someone who refused to leave me behind when death was a safer option." People glanced around, confused. Some fidgeted. Elena's smile twitched. Then his eyes locked on me. "She saved my life." He stepped off the stage, came directly toward me, then stood stiff and straight and saluted. "Ma'am." That word slammed into the room harder than any toast, any announcement. A silence thicker than velvet swallowed the air. And just like that, everyone finally saw me. They just didn't know what they were really seeing. Not yet. I think I knew, even at 6 years old, that I wasn't the daughter my mother wanted. She always had a soft spot for lace, for matching bows, for tidy little girls with angel voices and soft curls. Elena fit that perfectly. She was sunshine and satin, smiling at cameras, giggling on cue, glowing when Mom beamed at her like she'd birthed royalty. And me? I was the blur in the background of every photo, the one in the cargo pants, arms crossed, eyes always scanning, never smiling. It wasn't that I was angry, just misfit. I liked quiet, I liked airplanes, I liked watching things move, calculating their speed. My first love wasn't a boy, but a P-51 Mustang model kit my dad helped me build. I memorized aircraft names instead of fairy tales. While Elena was getting fitted for recital dresses, I was building Lego landing gear and asking Dad how thrust worked. He loved it. He loved me. He was the only one who did. Dad never tried to change me. He taught me how to shoot a basketball and how to catch lies in people's eyes. He called me Hawk because I noticed everything, especially the things people tried to hide. But when he died of a heart attack just after my 12th birthday, the air in the house turned to ice. Mum changed that day. Or maybe she stopped pretending. Without Dad, I became the family's silent embarrassment. Elena bloomed into her perfect mold, and I just existed. They stopped including me in family events. I was told not to talk too much at church. I ruined photos with my posture. My opinions were aggressive. My career interests, not very ladylike. The word military first came out of my mouth when I was 16. I might as well have said murder. Mom didn't argue. She just turned away. Later, I realised that was her way of disowning me without having to say it aloud. By the time I turned 22, my mother had already rewritten me out of the family story. Not dramatically, not in one blow. She did it the way water shapes stone, slow, deliberate, with an edge of denial. One missing Christmas card, a forgotten birthday, then a family reunion I only heard about through a cousin's Facebook post. Each omission was subtle enough to be explained away, if she ever felt the need to explain, which she didn't. "Eleanor didn't think you'd want to come," she said once, when I asked about a niece's baptism I wasn't invited to. "With your deployments and all, you're always so busy." Busy, yes. And away. But not unreachable. Never unloving. I sent gifts. I made calls. I asked about holidays. The silence, though, was deafening. And intentional. At some point, I stopped being her daughter and became a complication she managed. When I made First Lieutenant, I called her to share the news. She didn't answer. She texted 3 days later. "That's nice, Claire. Will you be back for Elena's graduation photos?" As if what I'd accomplished was a mild update on the weather, and Elena's smile in a cap and gown somehow outweighed a military promotion. It wasn't jealousy. I didn't want Elena's life. I didn't need her approval. But what wore me down was the quiet way they all conspired to forget me. At family dinners, I was assigned the overflow table, even when I flew across the country to be there. Elena's boyfriend, now husband, once introduced me to a friend as Elena's cousin who's in the Air Force or something. She corrected him, but not before I saw the smirk on his face. He meant it. One Thanksgiving, I brought a bottle of wine from France, something I'd picked up during a brief stopover in Toulouse. No one opened it. Instead, they served boxed rosé and said nothing. That was the night I stopped bringing anything to their table. But perhaps the moment that sealed everything came after Dad's funeral. I stayed behind a few days, hoping grief might melt something inside her. I thought we'd talk, grieve together, share memories. Instead, she handed me a checklist of utilities to shut off and told me not to touch his books. "They're for Elena," she said. "He wanted them passed down to someone who'd appreciate them." I stood in front of those shelves for 20 minutes, staring at the same books Dad used to read to me, biographies of pilots, strategy manuals, even a signed Chuck Yeager memoir. All now off limits. That night, I left without saying goodbye. She didn't call. And from then on, I learnt the most painful truths about family. Sometimes they don't scream to reject you. They just erase you so quietly, you almost believe you were never there. The worst kind of betrayal doesn't come from enemies. It comes from people who share your name. I was 31 when the letter came down. At that point, I'd been serving in the Air Force for over a decade. I'd led missions, trained cadets, coordinated logistics in high-risk zones. Nothing flashy, just efficient, precise. I didn't chase glory, I chased results. But then came Operation Breakline, a classified extraction that had gone terribly sideways in the Afghan mountains. Our team was ambushed. A snowstorm trapped us. Communications failed. I carried one of our men, Colonel Robert Callahan, on my back for nearly 300 yards while under fire. The rescue took 19 hours. He survived. Barely. A month later, my commanding officer nominated me for a Distinguished Flying Cross. I didn't tell anyone in my family. I'd stopped sharing long before that. But I was proud, quietly, deeply proud. Then came the inquiry. An anonymous letter had been submitted to the base's Inspector General's office claiming I had falsified my after-action report, that I'd exaggerated my role, that I'd manipulated medical evacuation logs to place myself at the centre of the heroism. It shook me, not because it was true, but because of how specific it was. Whoever wrote it had access to the jargon. The tone wasn't bitter, it was calculated, surgical, someone who knew how military systems worked, someone who knew enough to destroy me. The investigation dragged for 6 months. I was grounded, stripped from my team, my nomination was rescinded, and though no formal charges were made, no one apologized either. The cloud stuck. I wore it like a second skin. I spiraled. I started checking emails obsessively, rereading every detail of the report, looking for gaps in how someone could have twisted it. I barely slept. I snapped at my junior officers. One night I found myself staring at my reflection in a gym mirror at 2 a.m, wondering what I was even fighting for anymore. I told myself the worst part was the injustice, but truthfully, it was the not knowing who would hate me enough to do that. It would be years before I learned the truth. Years before I traced that letter's phrasing, its choice of stationery, its timing. Years before the handwriting, the slight backward tilt, the looping F, became familiar. And when it did, I realized it wasn't written by a stranger. It came from someone I once called family. But that revelation, that comes later. The envelope arrived with no warning, no return address, no handwritten note, just embossed lettering on thick ivory paper and a card that smelled faintly of gardenia, like something expensive pretending to be sincere. Inside, an invitation to Elena's wedding. It should have gone straight into the trash. But I held it. The script was elegant, generic, Mr. and Mrs. Graham requests the honour of your presence. As if we were still a family, as if I hadn't been surgically removed from holiday photos and ignored for birthdays for the past 6 years. There was a note tucked inside, separate from the invitation. It was from her. Claire, we know you're busy, but if you can make it, it would mean a lot. Just please keep it low-key, no uniforms, no speeches, no surprises. No surprises. It took me a full minute to realise what that really meant. She wasn't asking me to attend. She was asking me to stay quiet, to show up and not exist too loudly. I should have said no, should have laughed and shredded the thing, but I didn't, because for a sliver of a second, against all better judgment, I wanted to believe it, that maybe she'd changed, that maybe they wanted to mend something, that this wasn't another performance with me cast as the outsider. So I texted her, "Okay, I'll come." Her reply came minutes later. "Thank you. Please don't make this about you." And there it was, the truth, slipping out between polite punctuation. She didn't invite me to reconnect. She invited me to disappear on cue. Still, I packed a black dress. One that didn't show rank or scars. I booked a flight and told no one on base. I didn't even tell Callahan, who still sent a Christmas card every year since the rescue. This wasn't about pride, it was about closure. Or so I told myself. 2 nights before the wedding, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the invitation again like it might change if I read it enough times. Not the message. No, that was seared into my memory. It was the guest list that held my attention now. Folded neatly inside the RSVP card was a small itinerary, standard for big weddings. Ceremony at 4 p.m, followed by cocktails, dinner, dancing. Parents of the bride, Cynthia and the late William Holloway. Parents of the groom, Mr. and Mrs. Robert Callahan. I blinked, then read it again. Robert Callahan. There was no photo, but I didn't need one. That name lived in my bones. He was the reason I still limped when the weather dropped below 35. The man I carried, blood-soaked and unconscious, through a blizzard under insurgent fire. I hadn't seen him since the medevac, had only heard months later that he'd survived. We never spoke. He'd written a letter once, typed, formal. "Your actions saved my life. I will never forget them." I never responded, not because I didn't care, but because I didn't need thanks. That mission had cost me more than anyone ever knew. Recognition couldn't return the friend we lost that night, or the 2 inches of steel that still lived near my hip. And now he was the father of Elena's fiancé. The odds were astronomical. I read the card again, heart thudding, something shifting in the back of my mind like a puzzle piece clicking into place. She knew. Elena knew who he was. There's no way she didn't. So why invite me now? What game was this? A trap? A twisted display? A chance to humiliate me in front of someone who owed me his life? Or was it something else? There was another possibility, one I didn't want to believe. What if he had requested my presence? What if Robert Callahan had looked at the guest list and said she should be there? And what if Elena agreed, but on her terms? I leaned back, fingers tightening around the edge of the table. Maybe this wasn't about family at all. Maybe this was a reckoning, not for them, but for me. The church was a restored colonial building, all stone arches and polished wood, the kind of place that made everything feel curated, every flower petal, every fake smile. I arrived 15 minutes early, out of habit more than courtesy. Military time dies hard. No one noticed me. A few guests lingered outside, sipping cucumber water and exchanging soft laughs. Eleanor's friends, no doubt. Glossy hair, pastel dresses, not a single wrinkle between them. I nodded at one couple I vaguely recognised. They stared past me like I was part of the architecture. Inside it was cooler, dimmer. Music floated from hidden speakers, soft, classical, the kind that never offends. I made my way to the guest table near the entrance, where a young man in a tux was checking names. He didn't even look up when he asked, "Name?" "Holloway," I said. "Claire Holloway." He scanned the list, brows pinched. "Holloway, Holloway. He paused. Sorry, do you have a middle name, or maybe it's under something else? I waited. He kept looking, then he brightened. Ah, Clara Hollowell. Must be a typo. He scribbled on a post-it and handed me a seating card. Table 18. I didn't correct him. Table 18 was near the back, adjacent to a half-shuttered service door and a tall potted fern that obscured most of the room, perfectly placed to be forgotten. I walked the aisle slowly, heels echoing louder than I intended. Eyes flicked toward me, then away. One woman whispered to her husband. He shrugged. At my table, there were already 3 people seated. None looked up. One was scrolling on her phone. Another was adjusting his cufflinks. The third sipping what I suspected was something stronger than champagne. No one said hello. I sat down, spine straight, hands on my lap, like I was in formation. A breeze from the service door stirred the hem of my dress. I didn't move. This wasn't new. This was just family, extended through blood or marriage, but still carrying the same cold temperature. I told myself it didn't matter. I was here to witness, not to belong. And yet some part of me still listened for a voice that never came. Not Claire, not even Clara. Just silence. Dinner came with fanfare, linen napkins folded like swans, 3 forks per plate, and a champagne flute that never emptied. No one at table 18 made eye contact. They chatted among themselves, occasionally glancing toward the head table like moths to light. I barely touched my food. When the waitstaff cleared the dessert plates, the MC tapped the mic twice and announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our stunning bride, Eleanor, for a few words." Applause bloomed like forced laughter. Phones rose in unison. Eleanor stood, radiant in white silk, flawless makeup, her voice syrupy smooth. She held a delicate crystal glass in her left hand, a cue card in the other. "I promise I won't take long," she began, smiling wide. "I know everyone's ready to hit the dance floor." Laughter. Polite. Programmed. She turned slightly toward the groom, eyes soft. "I want to thank my husband for choosing me, for loving me, for standing by me even when I'm difficult, which I never am." Giggles. Then her tone shifted. "And of course, thank you to all our guests for travelling near and far to celebrate with us. Especially those we haven't seen in years, decades maybe." My shoulders stiffened. She didn't look at me, not directly, but her voice tilted, subtly enough that only someone who knew her would hear it. "It means a lot to have everyone here, even the wanderers," she continued, letting the word hang like smoke. "You know, those brave souls who choose the wild path. Not everyone needs a family. Some chase other kinds of glory. That's okay." A few heads turned. She smiled wider. "Some of us build homes. Some of us disappear." There it was. Not a slap. Not a scream. Just a surgical strike, coated in sugar and applause. I didn't flinch, didn't blink. But I felt the echo ripple through the tables like a current. Polite smiles stiffening, forks pausing mid-air. She raised her glass. "To love, to loyalty, and to finding our way back home." Everyone clinked glasses. I lifted mine, held it mid-air, then set it down, untouched. As the crowd settled back into clinking glasses and murmured side conversations, I excused myself under the pretense of needing air. Not that anyone noticed. I slipped away from table 18, past the dessert station, and wandered toward the side corridor that led to the coat room and a half-lit alcove lined with framed wedding photos from generations past. That's when I saw him. At first glance, he looked like any other middle-aged guest in a tailored suit, slightly balding, expensive watch, posture a little too stiff to be natural. He stood near a marble-topped sideboard, sipping from a short tumbler. But it wasn't the drink or the suit that made me stop. It was his eyes, sharp, calculating, familiar. It took me seconds to place him, but once I did, the memory locked in like a trigger pulled. Captain Raymond Deeks, Internal Affairs, Air Force Office of Special Investigations. He was the lead investigator on my case, the man who interrogated me for 6 hours straight when the anonymous letter surfaced. He never raised his voice, never accused outright. He didn't need to. His strength was in the doubt he planted. His specialty was dismantling reputations from the inside out. And now he was here, at Elena's wedding. Our eyes met briefly. His didn't widen in surprise. He just looked at me, expression unreadable, then turned away to join a group by the bar. No handshake, no nod, no recognition, but it was him. I stood frozen, mind racing. Why would Deeks be here, at this wedding, on this coast, in this family, unless this wasn't just a coincidence, unless this entire evening, my presence, the toast, the guest list, had been more curated than I imagined. A trap, a test, or worse, an orchestration? For the first time that night, I felt something deeper than discomfort. I felt hunted. I could have left. Every instinct told me to. There was nothing left to salvage. Elena had made her point. My mother hadn't acknowledged me once. And now the presence of Captain Deeks, like a ghost from my darkest chapter, confirmed this was no accident. If this was meant to be a trap, then I had walked into it without armour, without allies. But I didn't move. I returned to table 18, past the chandeliers and laughter and clinking flutes, past the stairs that slid off me like condensation on glass. I sat down exactly where they'd placed me, out of sight, out of story, and folded my hands in my lap. I would not run. I had done enough of that already. From bases, from battles, from silence and suspicion. I'd spent years trying to outpace the shadow of a letter written by someone who wanted me forgotten, but not tonight. Tonight I would not disappear just to make them more comfortable. The music swelled, sappy jazz with all the sincerity of a Hallmark card. Eleanor and her husband took the dance floor. She glowed under the spotlight, every hair in place, her smile practiced to perfection. Around me, people sighed and swooned. A woman 2 tables over dabbed her eyes. I watched in stillness. From my purse, I slid out a small, folded square of velvet. Inside was the medal, the one I wasn't supposed to receive. The one stripped from my record after the investigation buried my name under layers of doubt. It wasn't the medal that hurt, it was what it represented. Truth stolen, honour withheld, justice deferred. I turned it over in my hand, running my thumb along the ridges. I didn't plan to show it. I hadn't even meant to bring it. But something had told me to. A whisper, maybe. A tether to the version of myself they refused to see. I tucked it back into my bag before anyone noticed. Across the room, a flash of silver caught my eye. Robert Callahan. He sat at the head table, smile faint, but eyes alert, sharper than I remembered. He wasn't laughing, wasn't clapping, just watching. Not the couple, me. And for the first time all evening, I felt seen, not admired, not welcomed, just recognised. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that's why I stayed. Not for them, not for closure, but because sometimes surviving the room that wants to erase you is its own kind of war. And I wasn't about to lose. I was halfway through my second untouched glass of champagne when I heard it, soft, tentative, almost disbelieving. Claire Holloway? I turned slowly. She stood just beside my table, clutching a small, sequined clutch to her chest, wearing a navy blue dress that flattered her in that quiet, grown woman way, modest but self-assured. Her hair was shorter than I remembered, streaked with soft grey at the temples. But her eyes hadn't changed. Rachel Whittaker, high school debate team, former best friend. The last person to hug me at my father's funeral before I boarded a Greyhound bus to boot camp, and never looked back. I blinked, the name catching in my throat like a long-forgotten song. Rachel? She smiled, wide and genuine, before sitting without asking. I knew that was you. God, I wasn't sure. Elena didn't say you'd be here. Probably wasn't supposed to, I murmured. Her smile faltered a little, but not from discomfort, from recognition. I'm sorry, she said softly, for everything, for how they treated you. Back then, now, all of it. I didn't respond right away. I hadn't come for apologies, and definitely not from someone who hadn't caused the wound in the first place. But Rachel kept going. I've followed your career, you know, not obsessively or anything, just enough. You were in Air Command, right? Afghanistan? I remember seeing a segment once. The news didn't name names, but I saw a photo. I knew it was you. I shifted in my seat, unsure how to feel. Suspicion flared. Had Elena invited her to fish for details? Was this part of the setup? But Rachel's expression wasn't prying. It was reverent, and something else. Protective. She leaned in. You know that guy sitting near the bar? Balding. Dark tie. Been watching you like a hawk. My pulse ticked up. Deeks? I don't know his name, but I caught him talking to your mother earlier. They didn't see me. She didn't look happy you showed up. Of course not. Rachel hesitated, then reached into her clutch and pulled out a folded square of paper, a printout. This was emailed to me by mistake. I think my name got mixed into some CC list for vendors. It's a seating arrangement. You weren't on the original list. I unfolded it. She was right. No table 18, no Clara Hollowell, no typo, no name. I had never been meant to be invited. Rachel looked at me, eyes steady. Someone added you last minute, and I don't think it was Elena. I stared down at the list again, heartbeat in my ears. Someone wanted me here, someone who knew everything, and maybe someone who was tired of watching me get erased. Rachel didn't stay long. She squeezed my hand once before slipping away, blending back into the reception like a shadow that had never existed. But her words lingered. I tucked the seating chart into my purse beside the velvet pouch. Around me, the wedding was shifting gears. Dance music now, loud and glittery. Eleanor was back on the floor, spinning in the arms of her new husband, surrounded by a circle of bridesmaids who looked like they'd been practicing for this moment since high school. My mother stood near the dessert table, expression tight, clutching a flute of champagne with white-knuckled precision. I stayed in my chair, silent, still. And that's when the murmurs began. At first it was just one couple 2 tables down. The woman leaned into her husband, phone angled discreetly, whispering something as she scrolled. His eyes widened. He took the phone, whispered back, then another group, then another. Not loud, not obvious, but unmistakable. The ripple was starting. Someone had Googled me, or maybe recognized my face, or maybe Rachel had said something to someone. However it started, it didn't matter. I felt the shift in the air like a change in weather, curiosity blooming, then respect, then awe. A waiter approached me with a fresh drink. This time he called me Mom without looking at the name tag on his tray. I glanced to my left and caught a young man in uniform, Air Force Blues, second cousin of the groom maybe, staring at me like he'd just connected dots that no one else had seen. When our eyes met, he straightened his back instinctively, a reflex burned into bone. Another couple walked past my table and offered a hesitant smile. Not pity, not mockery, just recognition. They didn't know the whole story. They didn't need to. The silence around me wasn't empty anymore. It was loaded, suspended. As if everyone suddenly understood there was something about me they had overlooked, something they might regret ignoring. I didn't move. Didn't speak, didn't smile. I simply sat and let them wonder, let them fill in the blanks of a story they had chosen not to hear, let them feel the gravity of presence, not noise. That was the power I had forgotten I possessed, not medals, not rank, not speeches, just being unshakably, defiantly real in a room built to erase me. And finally, after years of exile, of silence, of whispered shame, the whispers were mine. The band had just begun a jazz rendition of At Last, when the microphone screeched, not loud, just enough to cut through the clinking glasses and tipsy laughter. A small technical hiccup, probably, but it silenced the room all the same. And then a voice. "Excuse me?" The room turned as one. He stood slowly, with the poise of someone used to commanding attention, not demanding it, just being the centre when he chose. Robert Callahan, groom's father. Decorated colonel, medically retired but still walking like his spine was carved from iron. I recognised that stance. I'd seen it once before, right before he collapsed into my arms, lungs full of freezing air, his blood soaking through my vest. He didn't look at me, not yet. He adjusted the lapels of his tux, cleared his throat into the mic, and gave a polite nod to Elena and her husband. "Pardon the interruption," he said, voice steady. "I won't be long." Elena looked confused but smiled, expecting a sweet anecdote or fatherly toast. Even my mother straightened with expectation, as though prepared to beam at another round of flattery for the happy couple. But Callahan's gaze shifted and landed on me. I didn't flinch, but my hands clenched beneath the table. "There's someone here tonight," he said slowly, his voice growing heavier with each word. "Someone whose name doesn't appear on any program. Someone many of you may have overlooked." People started turning in their seats, scanning the room. I felt the air thicken, like the moment before a lightning strike. He continued, 12 years ago, I was left for dead in a mountain pass, trapped beneath freezing debris, shot through the shoulder, disoriented, bleeding out. My unit couldn't reach me. Medics called it too dangerous. They said it was over." A pause. But one person didn't accept that. Now every eye was on me. Even the band stopped playing. "She crawled through enemy fire. She dragged my 200-pound frame up a slope slick with snow and blood. She tore the lining from her own coat to stop the bleeding, and she didn't leave, not until the helicopter came." My mother's face paled. Elena blinked, jaw shifting like she'd just tasted something sour. Callahan looked straight at me. "I owe her my life. My son owes her his father. And all of you, every guest enjoying this day, owe her more than you know." He stepped down from the stage, buttoned his jacket, and approached my table. The silence was so dense it rang in my ears. He stopped in front of me, stood tall, raised his hand in a clean, formal salute. "Ma'am," he said, voice firm, "it's about damn time they saw you." And just like that, the room exhaled. But it wasn't relief, it was realization. For a moment, no one moved. The kind of moment you remember not in seconds, but in heartbeats. Callahan held his salute like a statue. Spine straight, chin high, palm sharp against his brow, a gesture not of habit, but of honour. The kind that isn't given, it's earned. Every breath in the room stalled. He was saluting me. Not Elena, not the groom, not the guests in their pastel gowns and polished shoes. Me, the one with no name tag, the one whose presence had been treated like an inconvenience. And then something shifted. A man near the front table stood, young, lean, in uniform. He lifted his hand, crisp and clean. Another woman, Air Force, judging by the pin on her shawl, rose a beat later, then another, and another. One by one they stood, silent, saluting. It wasn't planned, it wasn't coordinated, it was instinct, a ripple of respect rising from memory, from service, from truth. It was also rebellion against the forced smiles, the curated guest list, the decades of erasure, against mothers who buried shame beneath etiquette and sisters who weaponized sweetness, against everything that had tried to make me small. I didn't return the salute, not yet. I just stood, slowly, calmly, and looked out across the room that had tried to forget me. My mother had gone pale, frozen in place, champagne flute trembling slightly in her grip. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Elena. Elena stared like she couldn't recognize me, like she was seeing me for the first time and didn't like what she saw. The groom, bless his heart, looked between me and his father with dawning understanding. And then, quietly, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. Robert Callahan dropped his salute, but he didn't step back. Instead, he reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a small object, round, flat, glinting under the chandelier light. A coin, a challenge coin, custom engraved. The kind passed between warriors, not bought, not given lightly. He pressed it into my hand. His voice low. For valor. No one else had the courage to see. I closed my fingers around it, the metal warm from his palm. Behind me, a guest gasped softly. Another murmur, a ripple, a shift. Not shame, not scandal. Respect, earned, demanded, reclaimed. And in that moment, after decades of silence and shadow, I knew something had changed, not just in the room, in me. After the applause faded, after Callahan returned to his seat and the music awkwardly stumbled back to life, the room tried to resume its previous rhythm. But it was off now, off in a way no band or open bar could fix. Eyes followed me, but not with mockery this time, with hesitation, with questions. I sat again at table 18, heart steady, jaw set. Something in me had crystallized like steel cooling after the forge. I reached for my water glass, and that's when I noticed it. A corner of white, tucked just beneath the edge of my dinner plate. Not visible unless you were seated, not something a waiter would have left, too intentional, too precisely placed. I lifted the plate slowly. An envelope. No name, no seal, no logo. Just plain ivory, thick paper, folded once and held shut with a faint crease. Heavy for its size. I looked around. No one was watching me now. Not directly, but I felt the tension in the air tighten again, like the moment before a storm hits. I opened it. Inside was a single folded page, no salutation, no signature. But the words, I'd seen them before. Not the content, but the style, the rhythm, the voice. It was a copy of the anonymous letter. The letter. The one that destroyed my nomination. That led to the investigation. That stripped me of a medal I had rightfully earned. I froze. The wording was exact, the same phrases, the same accusations. Manipulated mission logs. Falsified accounts of heroism. Risked unit cohesion for self-glory. All in neat formal cadence. Emotionless. Clinical. But this time something was different. At the bottom, faintly, barely there, handwriting, 2 short words added in blue ink. She deserved it. My pulse thudded, not typed, not copied, handwritten. It wasn't the words that stopped me. It was the handwriting itself. Something about the curve of the D, the backward slant of the S, the way the T crossed low. I'd seen that penmanship before, on birthday cards, grocery lists left on the fridge, notes slipped into lunchboxes during grade school. For a moment I couldn't breathe. This wasn't Elena's writing, not Rachel's, not Callahan's. It was my mother's. I read it again. Over and over. As if the loops and slants might magically shift into someone else's hand. But they didn't. My mother hadn't just been complicit in erasing me from the family. She had tried to destroy me professionally, and now she had left this note under my plate. Or someone had. Someone who wanted me to know, a truth long buried, slid onto my table like a final course. And suddenly I realized this night wasn't over. It was just beginning. I folded the letter slowly, carefully, as if it might catch fire in my hands, my mother's handwriting, my mother's betrayal. But somehow it didn't stick, not fully. A voice in my head, cold and logical, whispered, "No, it's too easy." It had to be Elena. It made more sense. She had always needed to shine, and my presence, my medals, my uniform, my stories, dimmed her spotlight. Even as children, she needed to be the favoured one, the praised one. I remembered the look on her face every time Dad clapped for me instead of her. It was subtle, tight jaw, polite smile, but eyes like glass. She'd spent years building the perfect life, the marriage, the friends, the curated image. I didn't fit that mould. I was the shadow that ruined her portrait. And who else would have motive? Who else had the proximity, the access, the resentment? It had to be her. Maybe the handwriting was forged. Maybe she'd found an old grocery list, mimicked the loops and crosses. She'd always been clever with details. It was exactly the kind of thing she'd do. Weaponize sentiment, bend reality, and keep her hands clean. I looked up. She stood on the dance floor, her veil pushed back, laughing with a cousin like nothing had happened. But I saw it now. The control, every gesture measured, every smile practiced. A politician in a bridal gown. She caught me staring, our eyes locked. She held my gaze, just long enough to flick her chin up, slightly, barely noticeable. Dismissal. Challenge. Know your place. My fists curled under the table. The letter was still in my lap, the words pulsing through me like a second heartbeat. If she was bold enough to write it, to place it here, then what else had she done? Had she manipulated Mom? Had she coached Captain Deeks? Had she pulled the strings that kept me out of family photos, out of family events, out of the truth? The anger burned quick and bright. But under it, something colder bloomed. Resolve. Not revenge, not yet. Just the need for truth, real truth. Because if she did write it, if she really sent that letter all those years ago, then tonight wasn't just her wedding. It was her reckoning. I waited, not for drama, not for confrontation, for certainty. I knew better than to charge at Elena with accusations and shaky logic, not after what I'd endured, not after what they'd tried to erase. If I was going to rip open the truth, I wanted it naked, undeniable. I'd spent too many years being gaslit by silence to accept anything less. So I watched. I waited until the music softened again, and people drifted toward the buffet or the bar. I stood, walked slowly across the ballroom, not toward Elena, not yet. Toward my mother. She stood alone, her back to me, scanning the floor like a general surveying her kingdom. Perfect posture, impeccable pearls, a woman composed. But when I said her name just once, Mom, her shoulders twitched. She turned, smile already fixed. Yes? I held up the envelope. I didn't say a word, just let it hang between us like a blade. Her smile flickered, only for a fraction of a second, but I saw it. "What's this?" she asked, voice smooth. Too smooth. I opened it, took out the letter, held it so only she could read, then pointed to the handwriting, the two small words. She deserved it. Her gaze dropped for a moment, just a flicker, then rose again. "You're imagining things," she said softly. "You always did have such a dramatic streak." There it was, the gaslight reflex, quick, polished. But this time, I was ready. "I remember," I said calmly. "You used to write me notes in my lunchbox, folded in triangles. Good luck on your math test. Proud of you. That D always dipped below the line. That same loop on the airs. You used blue ink then too." A pause. A flash of something in her eyes. Guilt? No. Worse. Annoyance. I leaned in. "Why, Mum?" She exhaled. A little too long. And then she shrugged. "Because you wouldn't stop." The words were simple, but their weight cracked something inside me. "I gave you every chance to fall in line," she said, quieter now. "To be normal. You insisted on being difficult, on embarrassing us. The military, public service, it wasn't pride, Claire. It was ego." I stared at her. "You tried to end my career." She didn't flinch. "I tried to keep you from ruining your life. And ours." The air around us turned cold. Not from temperature, but from truth laid bare. I had spent years blaming Elena, years thinking she was the spider at the centre of the web. But the hand behind the thread, the one spinning from the shadows, had been Mom's all along. Eleanor had just grown up in her image. I backed away, not in fear, in clarity, because now I knew. It wasn't about being unwanted, it was about being uncontrolled. And that's what she couldn't forgive. I didn't cry. Not when she turned away, chin lifted as if the truth she'd spilled was something dignified. Not when she slipped back into the crowd, folding herself into the elegant safety of people who would never know what she'd done. I didn't scream, didn't chase Elena either. She wasn't innocent, but she wasn't the architect, just the favoured daughter trained to mirror her mother's contempt. Instead, I walked, out through the side doors, into the night air that hit colder than expected. The hum of music still pulsed behind me, but out here everything was still. Honest. I pulled the challenge coin from my purse and let it rest in my palm. Then slowly I unfolded the letter one last time and stared at those 2 words. She deserved it. I smiled. Because they were right, just not in the way she meant. I did deserve it. I deserve better than the half-love she rationed like a punishment, better than a family that measured worth in obedience, better than a sister who couldn't see past her reflection. And I had found it, not here, not tonight, but in the people I'd bled beside, served beside, in strangers who saluted without knowing my name, in Rachel's quiet return, in Robert Callahan's unwavering hand, even in myself. Especially in myself. I didn't need their acceptance, didn't need them to rewrite history. I just needed to stop letting their silence write me. I reached into my bag, pulled out the envelope, tore it once, then again until it fluttered into the garbage like confetti, and just like that, I was done carrying it. Inside, the music swelled again. Someone shouted a toast. The crowd erupted in laughter. I turned from the building without looking back. Let them dance, let them smile, let them live inside the story they built. I had my own, and finally I was free to tell it.